Hello, class. Want to remind you of a couple of things. So, of course, remember last week we talked about laissez-faire economics, where it is believed that the government should keep their hands off the economy. Many believe that if the government got involved, it would kill the whole idea of capitalism. But now, as you know, we've been talking about the 1920s and how the 1920s were a booming time for the United States. In fact, it's called the Roaring Twenties. Things were going great. People had money, and there was new technology coming into play, and people are buying things left and right, and mainly because of this new idea called credit. And that's going to lead us into some problems because as we get into late 1920s, we're going to start to talk about some major things. Remember, yesterday we talked about some of that. So now we're going to take a look at a couple of different things. Remember, I'm going to give you some reminders. We've talked about before the crash, we talked about, again, that booming technology. Everything's going great. People are loving, but it's building this false sense of security. And then we talked about a primary source document that was shared and some thoughts from Calvin Coolidge. And how, remember, we talked about if Calvin starts talking, well, maybe we should listen because his nickname was Silent Cal. And he talked about how the chief business of the American people is business itself. And then he talks about in the end how the government should not get involved with the economy because it will kill the economy. And that will take away from what has made this country great. And then we talked about, the stock market crashed. We had the bubble burst. Remember, we talked about the stock market and how it was this bubble stock market and how things were overinflated, and that overinflation caused major problems. We had a burst. Okay, now that, and we talked about another primary source where people talking about running to the banks, and they're trying to get their money out of the banks, but you can't get money out of a bank that doesn't have any money. And that's what the problem is. We've got banks that hold on to money, and that's what people don't understand when they start looking at banks. Banks, when you put money into the bank then takes that money and invests it. They spend that money, and they make your money work for them. Well, when the stock market crashed, they didn't have any money sitting in the banks. So when people go to run to get money out of the bank, there's nothing there. And it causes this panic in the people. They start to really go crazy, and everybody's spreading the word that we got to go get our money, and money's not there. And it causes this major panic, which perpetuates the situation. Now people have lost that sense of security they had in the economy, and now they have no security at all. They have no confidence in it. Now, what I want you to do is we're going to take a look at what happened. And then we have Hoover's philosophy, President Herbert Hoover. Okay? And remember, his tagline was, "Who but Hoover? Who could fix this other than Hoover himself?" Now, as the crisis deepened, Herbert Hoover faced growing pressure to act. However, Hoover believed strongly in a limited government. The government should not get involved at all. He argued that the strength of the American system came from individual responsibility and the local action. He feared that a direct federal aid would weaken independence and create a long-term dependence on the government. He believed that the American people should not depend on the government. Instead of direct relief, Hoover encouraged businesses to maintain wages and employment. But how can they maintain wages? There's no money coming in the businesses because people aren't spending money. They have this, again, they have no sense of security in the economy anymore. He called on local governments and charities to provide assistance. He believed the economy would recover if Americans remained patient and disciplined. But the situation continued to worsen. Here's how the capitalism works. Capitalism works when people are spending money. If people aren't spending money, capitalism doesn't work. And that's what we're having at this time. They had this false insecurity. They had all kind of money. Everything was great. And then all of a sudden the bubble burst. And when the bubble bursts, they're not spending their money. They don't even have money to spend. But if they did, they wouldn't do it. They would hoard their money. And if they're hoarding their money, it only makes the situation worse when it comes to the American economy. So let's take a look at a primary source that Herbert Hoover actually says. He says this: "Our system is founded upon the conception that only through ordered liberty, freedom to the individual, and equal opportunity to all, we can hope to secure the full fruits of progress. We have no place in our American system for government charity. The government should not support the people. The people should support the government. That's a new thinking. If we depart from these principles, we shall have struck at the roots of self-government. We shall have undermined the very spirit which was built upon this nation. Economic depression cannot be cured by legislative action or executive pronouncement. It can be cured only by the working of the economic cells of the body, the producers, and the consumers themselves. So I've got a couple of questions for you. Why does Hoover believe government aid is dangerous? Why does he think, what does he think will fix the economy? He doesn't really even mention it there, except for the fact of people working and continuing on with their diligence. Is this realistic in a crisis of this scale? Those are some questions you have to begin answering. When you answer these questions, I want you to write them down. I want you to share them, and I want you to reply to each other. Let's communicate about this stuff. What do we see? Now, the great thing is we can look at it in 2026, and we can look back on the sovereignty of God, and we can see how God, in his sovereign power and knowledge, got the American people through this crisis. But at the time, they didn't see that. They couldn't see God's hands working. Do we see God's hands working in the times that we have? When we're going through struggles, it's hard for us to see God's hand moving and working and doing things. But when we look back in history and we see things like this, we know that his hand is constantly working. We know that he is working and he is doing, and he has not just left us in this fishbowl and watching us from afar, but he is actually involved in our lives through his sovereignty. Let's talk about these things. Tell me what you think about the past couple of days, but now what Hoover is going to be doing. Because remember, in a couple of days, we're going to talk about Franklin Roosevelt, and he has a completely different idea. And we're going to dive into that. I'll see you next time.